Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Magnifying HR Voices. I feel like it's been a while since I've seen you guys. How are you doing? I hope everyone is doing well today. And I left a comment in the chat just to say, let us know like where you're joining us from, and tell us how you have dealt with working in a toxic work environment. What are some of the challenges that you face? My guest here today is Wendy Kelly, and we're going to talk a lot about that. So I'm going to bring up Wendy. We're going to get the ball going. And in the meantime, we'll give you a chance to get to know Wendy and also share with us. Have you ever worked in a toxic environment? Here we go. Hi, Wendy.
Hi, Julie. How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Good, good. It's glad to see you and happy to be here.
It's good to see you too. It's been quite a while. We were just saying that it's been quite a while since we've gotten together. So it's really good to have you here today to have this conversation with me about toxic workplaces. But before we get started, I'm going to leave you to introduce yourself to the audience. Tell everyone who is Wendy Kelly, what is your HR origin story, and what are you doing now?
Sure. So I am Wendy Kelly. I am the owner of KHR Services. It is a consulting firm. How I started, kind of an odd story. Actually, my first job was an HR director's position at a healthcare facility to actually build out their HR department. Just so actually in grad school at the time, studying human resources, and this position just landed in my lap. So I was able to take what I learned during grad school as well as what I was doing at that facility, and just kind of bolted my career. I later moved into a benefits administration role and then landed a role towards the end of my career. I decided to just kind of pivot and move into consulting, which I absolutely love. I focus primarily on project management and with an emphasis on HRIS systems.
Awesome. Thank you so much for
And
sharing
that's it
that.
about me.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. I think for the benefit of everyone, let me say up front, Wendy is having some internet issues and we're trying to work through them. So we're going to try to just be as professional as we can as we go through this conversation, but just bear with us. We really want to have this conversation with you guys today. So let's get into it. Wendy, we're here today to talk about workplace toxicity. And I think that for a lot of
But we're
people, when we
having a
think
little
about,
technical difficulty.
yes, and I did mention to the audience that there would be a delay. Can you hear me? Hi, Charlene.
Now I can. Looks like we were having a little technical difficulty.
Yes, I did say to the audience that you're getting some stuff worked out on your end with your internet, so we might have a bit of in and out, but we're gonna get through this because we're professionals and that's what we do, right?
Absolutely. And sometimes we know we're always hit with challenges. So, hey, we can truck through it.
Ain't nothing to it but to go through it, so we can do it. So I was just saying, Wendy, that we were
Absolutely.
talking about dealing with working in toxic environments, and I think at some point in our careers, especially as HR professionals, we've encountered those environments where it's been super toxic, and we've
Mm-hmm.
just had to walk away from it, but not without
Mm-hmm.
giving it some serious thought as to how we would deal with that particular environment or those moments. So
Mm-hmm.
let's start off by having that conversation, and I would love to hear from you guys in the audience. What do you think are some of the signs that you know of as it relates to a toxic workplace? How do I know that my workplace is a toxic environment?
Well, for me, I would say the first signs are absolutely communication, the lack of. So, having things trickle down and up. the lack of having those things. In addition to the micromanaging, the inability to have the autonomy to do your job, a lot of rigidness, lack of flexibility within the workplace. Um, for me, I am a big proponent of professional development and growth. The lack of those opportunities also, and
Mm-hmm.
I hate to admit it, but some organizations there are the bullying, right, that comes along in the workplace. So I would
Yeah,
say those are some key signs.
definitely. I think you've hit the nail on the head with a lot of those. I see people talking about micromanaging and
Mhm.
trust issues. These are big ones as well. And I would also add to that, like lack of accountability, right? When you
Yeah,
see
absolutely.
leaders not taking accountability,
Hmm.
when you see as an employee that you're getting highly stressed, you're burning out more because you're just taking on so much. And then I would also say, like, in terms of socialization as an organization, that if you're not tuned in to the culture or you
Hmm.
tune out, like if you emotionally check out, like that's a huge sign that your environment is could be a toxic environment. But I was also reading an article recently that put a spin on it that I never really gave much thought to.
Hmm.
And actually I was a part of a panel discussion yesterday that kind of added to this, which is like if the environment, like if the workplace itself is not set up in a way that makes you feel comfortable. So the architecture, the way things are positioned, um, if you're in an open concept when you really want to be like a little closed in a bit, like
Hmm.
if the
Hmm.
environment isn't conducive to you to feel like you want to be a part of the organization, then that's a clear sign, you know. And I see,
Hmm.
and also a comment here from Bobby: high turnover, high attrition. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Retention rates are low. So for me also, I remember going into a workplace that some years ago that I worked at, very dark, very gloomy, and approaching, I thought, this is just not for me, right? But
Yeah.
I went ahead. I think your gut also tells you if this environment is good for you. So
Hmm.
for me, I just was like, oh, let me give it a try. But what was very common within that workplace was that leadership led by fear. Staff was always afraid that, oh, if I do this or I say this, I'm going to lose my job. There was that fear factor. So that I would definitely add to a toxic work environment when
Hmm.
members of your staff are very fearful of anything
Yeah.
that they do.
Yeah. Leadership by fear is never good.
Hmm.
when we're when we're talking about being in a space where we're creating environments where people can feel psychologically safe, the last
Hmm.
thing you want to have or experience is working in an environment where you feel like you don't have that psychological safety. But to your point about dark and gloomy, like I previously, when I used to work for organizations, I never, like if I went to an interview and the environment just seemed too dark,
Hmm.
and sometimes not just by the aesthetics of it, but if it felt dark, if it felt heavy, like I would not accept the job. I wouldn't accept
Hmm.
the job there, you know what I mean? So I
Yeah,
definitely.
absolutely. Just everything, right? Your onboarding begins before you even enter into the facility or even apply, right? So going to a facility, the inability to find even parking, logistics of it can be like a
Mhm.
sign. Getting there, no one is greeting you. Coming in, a peeve of mine is having a manager say, I haven't had time to go through your resume, and you're there for an interview, and that's like a red
Red
flag
flag.
for me. It's
Red
like, wait
flag.
a minute, you thought the best of me to come in, and you haven't had the opportunity to review my resume. So those
Yeah,
there are a number of signs to identify a toxic work environment.
definitely. I think the comments are flying, Wendy. I am seeing
Let's
someone
see.
saying having CC soups and admin on everything. Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's not good enough at all. So as we
Yeah,
talk about, yeah, go ahead. Go
no,
ahead.
no, no, go ahead. Go ahead. No problem. Go ahead.
I'm trying to respect the delay. Um,
That's
yeah. So as we talk about like the signs of workplace toxicity, I want to think about like where does toxicity in the workplace have its biggest impact? Where do you think that is for you?
I think it's the employees. Your employees is what ultimately drive your business. So personally, what I experienced was mental, emotional, and physical distress while I was in a toxic work environment. High blood pressure, diagnosed with high blood pressure, the inability to sleep, anxiety. So the biggest impact is on your employees' well-being. Employees who are not well feel, they're less productive. The inability to meet deadlines, inability to concentrate on things, human errors, which cost money. So I think the biggest impact is your employees' well-being.
Definitely, I gotta agree there. And I would also say when we talk about employees at this point, we're referring to HR professionals being employees, because I think a lot of times
I
I
know that's a good point.
put out that disclaimer, right? Because a lot of
Yes.
times we just think about we don't think about the impact this has on
Hmm.
HR, but we as HR are employees. And as you mentioned,
Absolutely.
part of what you experienced led to physical health challenges, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So we really have to bear that in mind.
Yeah,
I'd
and
also
a lot of times we're viewed as not the people friendly, right? But a lot of that burden does, for me at least, falls on HR professionals. We consider our staff, we consider their families, we consider their well-being. And so a lot of that pressure to ensure that they're safe and have a safe space, sometimes in the middle of all of that, we neglect ourselves.
talk about it. Talk about it. It's what I talk about all day, every day. That lack of
Hmm.
self care in ourselves, and especially when we're working in a toxic environment, that
Hmm.
can just add to our burden completely. So,
Hmm.
we definitely want to focus on the importance of how do we handle working in toxic environments. So, look, I'm seeing the comments. We're going to tackle them. I'm seeing questions, but how do we deal with workplace toxicity, especially as HR professionals? Because I think a lot of times the misconception comes where people seem to believe that HR is to blame. We have this, yes, we play a part, but to put the sole responsibility of why the environment is so toxic on HR, not doing anything about the bullies or
Hmm.
poor leadership, and sometimes HR being a part of that problem. How do we deal with a toxic work environment?
So, as an HR professional, what I found was many times we would refer our staff or our employees to EAP, and often we don't utilize that for ourselves. So, I would say utilize your employee assistant program for yourself. The second biggest thing for me was the support group, other like minded HR professionals where I can call, bounce ideas off of, cry if I needed to have a moment to cry, even if I just needed a moment of silence, having that network of other professionals who understands not only from an employee perspective, but also from our position as an HR professional, that was the biggest help for me to get through those toxic work environment experiences.
Thank you for sharing that. And I know you're big on community and having like that soundboard, and we sit in some communities together. And I know that we've had some of those conversations, and being able to have people that you could trust. um,
Absolutely.
and I would just ask you like to share with the audience, like in terms of how do you build those communities? Where do you find them? Because a lot of times we talk about, yes, community is important, but we never share really where we can find that. So would you want to share with the audience like where you found your community and where you found your support?
Okay, so don't tell LinkedIn because I know we're on LinkedIn Live, but my support I actually found via Twitter. I
Okay.
am an avid Twitter user. And
Mhm.
so just following along that HR community hashtag and having the opportunity to meet other HR professionals and just kind of like, hey, you guys want to chat for 10 minutes and then building those long term friendships. That is where I actually found my network. When I
Yeah.
started out in human resources, I mentioned earlier, my first role was an HR director's role. I did not have anyone years ago that I could bounce ideas off of or ask questions of as a new HR professional. Back then, it wasn't appropriate to share information. Now, with this network, and thankfully for these types of platform in the internet, we're able to make these connections, and I'm definitely grateful for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I always say that community is always one click away, right?
I
And
like that.
no matter where you are looking, you will always find community if you just
Mhm.
look in the right places. So, yeah, I think the Twitter HR community is a fantastic group of people. And a lot of those people who sit on Twitter don't always utilize LinkedIn. And the reverse is true. Like a lot of our community that sit on LinkedIn don't always utilize Twitter. So you kind of have to straddle between both in order to get, the necessary
Mhm.
support and perspectives that you need, like to develop your career as an HR professional. I want to bring up this point that Brianna is making here in the chat.
Okay.
Hi, Brianna. Brianna is saying that leadership that isn't open to negative feedback or not open to change, they say they have an open door policy, but they really don't. And that really is a very huge contribution
Mm.
to toxicity in the workplace. When you have leaders that are not open to that feedback, that are not open to any kind of suggestions that you may have, or even to share information about what is making the workplace toxic, right? What are your thoughts?
Honestly, it's tough. I was in that position. I would provide constructive feedback, criticism to my leadership team, and it was, well, we've always done it this way. I haven't had a problem with this. I think what happens is change is very difficult for some. I worked at an organization where the individual had been in this role primarily his or her entire lifetime. And so change was very difficult for this particular individual. And I think when that happens, we need to try to shift our focus. And I think I've learned from that experience is to just ask the person, how do you like to receive your feedback?
Hmm.
And hopefully that individual will be honest and be receptive when you do provide it. But it is a difficult space to be in where the person is, hey, I'm open to it. And then when you share it, it's this pushback. It's tough. You can continue to try to have those tough conversations, maybe just maneuver around how you approach it. Sometimes it may be better to approach the person in the morning because they're a morning person, or it may be better to approach in the afternoon. But I would look at different ways. And the best way is just to ask, how do you prefer your feedback?
Yeah, I think that's a very important question to ask because then it sets the expectation of how we're going to carry this relationship forward
Mhm.
in terms of how we communicate with each other. And it means that you're taking that other person's communication style into consideration.
Mhm.
So I think that that's greatly appreciated. Then what happens in those instances, Wendy, where you are dealing with um, some form of toxicity, some form of bad behavior that's happening in the organization, and especially if it's happening at the leadership level and you're being asked to sweep it under the carpet.
So I'm the old school HR professional, and you will hear me say document, document, document. Document. The documentation is going to be your best friend. Make sure that those who are in the know needs that they do know. Um, I that's tough. I would say again, document, have that conversation, and also to bring some metrics on how the pros and cons. Per, Mostly, I'm sure it would be cons of how it would impact the organization. Tie some dollars to it. Sometimes people they need to see what it costs this company
Mm-hmm.
if we go this route. So tie in some metrics to if we go this route, this is the potential outcome include those legal dollars, we know that those could be very costly. So,
Hmm. Can you give us an example of metrics?
hmm. Well, you can use cost of turnover, right? How often is it for you to fulfill these positions? Does this particular leadership member on the team have a high turnover cost, and this behavior is continuing? So this is what it's costing us every time we have to replace an employee. Time to fill. How long is it taking us? These are dollars that are left on the table. Training to retrain. You can tie in those dollar amounts, and then back to, if it's something that's egregious that's trying to be swept up under the rug, you can tie in those DOL penalties that are associated with it, or any other penalties that may be associated with it, and then an estimated cost of what it is for legal to get involved if we get to X situation.
Hmm. Thank you so much for sharing those. And that brings me ties right into our next question, which is like, what are some of the challenges impacting the success of HR in their role when we work in a toxic environment? And I think you touched on a really great point there about, the frustrations that come with having to keep filling positions because people keep leaving.
Yeah.
What else do you want to add to that?
So, from a personal perspective, I would say my biggest challenge was leadership, and not having their support and buy-in. And because of that, all the other things came into play. My own health, my employees' health, the cost of hiring staff, the cost of training. Um, our branding was suffering also. You go online, you read these comments. So again, onboarding starts before the applicant even applies. So
Yeah.
there are so many things that impact that. But for me, um, the biggest challenge was leadership. If I could, I would have probably restructured. But sometimes that's not a option. So you
Yeah.
play with the cards that's dealt.
Hmm. And how did you feel like in those instances, in those moments, like did you feel really defeated? Like how did it really impact you personally and professionally? Like do you feel like a failure? How does it make you feel?
Oh, absolutely. We're human. We have feelings. Just because we have these positions doesn't mean that we don't have feelings. And so my blood pressure, as I mentioned, went up. Um, I couldn't sleep at night. I was having extreme anxiety. I was having nightmares, actually.
Wow.
Um, the inability to concentrate. I had gotten to a point where I just did not want to be there. I was not productive. I felt like I was letting my team down, and it was tough. It was a tough situation. And if I'm honest, if I could do it all over again, when I saw the red flags, I probably would have left sooner, because it
Hmm.
impacted me so much. I've been on jobs where, and I've had managers where it's been a challenge to work with, but one particular organization, I just was like, I cannot do this. And so it's a ding. You're like, oh my God, I've gone up the career ladder, I've done these amazing things. How
Yeah.
can I get to this point and still am not successful? But at the end of the day, when you really think about it and you think about your wins, I won by protecting myself and my health. And so that was my biggest win.
I love how you said that because I think um, my previous guest, Angela Shaw, last time, a couple weeks back, talked about that, like protecting yourself, and you
Hmm.
have to learn to put yourself first. And I
Yeah, and it's
think,
not a selfish act. it's
no,
it's selfish of you not to do so.
can you say that for the people in the back who maybe didn't hear?
It's
Like, just
not a
say it again.
selfish act to put yourself first. It's selfish not to do so.
Yes, yes,
Mhm.
because you don't want to end up in that position of having the insomnia, or the
Mhm.
nightmares, or the heightened blood pressure readings, or any other chronic disease that you could get as a result of putting staying in a toxic environment. But I
Mhm.
gotta ask, like, why? Why did you stay? Um, why? Why'd you do it?
This is a cliche, right? It's a cliche. It's the people. You hear this all the time. You get into
All the
human
time.
resources because of the people. I had an amazing team. I had an amazing workforce. The people, I mean, I had staff who would call and check on me because they hadn't seen me in a while. So it was the people. And I felt like if someone wasn't there to fight for them, then who would?
Yeah.
And so, but you can't win a battle with one person, or you're against 10,000. So you need an army to do that. And
Yeah.
so I stayed in hopes of, okay, this is going to get better, this is going to change. And sometimes you'll get a little glimpse of, oh, this is a possibility, because something might happen where you'll
Yeah.
get the thumbs up to do something positive for your team or positive for the organization, and you're like, oh, okay, we can actually make this work. And then,
Hmm.
I hate to say it, but change, again, it's hard for some people. They've been doing it for years.
Yeah.
Some people are just not going to change, and they're
No.
not going to embrace what's new, right? The workforce has changed drastically. It's not the
Hmm.
olden days where um, people are now in the office. We know more people are looking to work from home now. So, and some organizations are embracing it, and some aren't.
Yeah. Definitely. Thank you so much for sharing those nuggets, Wendy. I really feel like it's important for people to know the struggle that we go through as HR professionals before we make that decision to give up the ghost because it just
Mhm.
isn't working out. And I think Brianna's question ties in nicely here. Brianna's asking, what point do you feel like as an HR professional it's time to cut ties when after providing the feedback and nothing changes?
So for me, I've worked at a couple of places. I've had a couple of, managers, and that it was a challenge. Um, but I think right away. But again, it goes back to the hopes of, I can make this work. I can make this change. We can roll out some things. But I think right away. I took a job, and I lasted 2 weeks. Right, I went in, and I went in, and I was like, this is just not for me. When you get to the point where you wake up and you're sitting in the parking lot, and you're like, do I go in or do I call out? Right, and you're in the parking lot.
A
you
lot.
know you
Hmm.
know it's time. When you get to a point where you are not sleeping well at night, it's time. When you get to a point where you're coming home and you don't have time for your family because all you're discussing is work, 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 it's time. When you're on vacation and your phone is ringing off the hook, 7 o'clock,
Mm.
midnight, weekends,
Mm.
whatever, it's time when those
Mhm.
boundaries are not respected. So I think I would just say follow your gut. I have gotten to a place, even with my consulting, that if it's just not a good fit, it's okay. It's fine. We can remain friends, we can remain colleagues, we can remain, just bouncing ideas off of each other, but we may not can work together in this capacity, and that's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
I love what you said because I think it took me a little while to get to that space. But I mean, I'm 100% there now. And I've been there for a few years where, as a consultant, you can say, look, I appreciate that you're coming to me and
Hmm.
trying to engage my services, but I don't think that we're going to be a good fit. And be
Yeah.
okay with that. Like, and be okay with that. And whatever the repercussions are of that, sometimes I found that by saying no to one person, it's given them the opportunity to find the right fit for them.
Absolutely.
And it's given me the opportunity to find the right fit for me, right?
Hmm.
And I think that a lot of times we struggle with coming to grips with that. And to your other point about red flags, we see so many red flags in our environment. And a lot of times we go, well, maybe it's just, and we put
Hmm.
that on the back burner. And then something else happens and we go, well, maybe it's not how the story that I'm telling in my head, maybe it's something else. We don't seek to engage, we don't seek to inquire, we just let it be. And then that adds to the pile of what's already like
Hmm.
all these other things that are creeping up. And then sometimes it takes something to do like hit us like smack dab in the face. And we go, okay, it is what it is.
That aha moment. Let me just share with
Yeah.
you. I started at a company years ago, and I was there for a while. And I went in for an orientation, and a high level employee says to me, "Well, we're not going to pay you for the full day." Now, mind you, I'm exempt. So we're not going to pay you for the full day because you're only here for an hour for orientation. Well, we know I'm supposed so I just contributed, well, maybe this person just doesn't know, um not educated, not a big deal, but that was my red flag, right? Get in,
Mm-hmm.
and I realized the fireworks are going off. But
Uh-huh.
again, you know, and as an HR professional, we know the whole drill, right? We're interviewing the employer just as much as they're interviewing us, and we're asking those questions. And one thing I would just add is stick to your values.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things, and that's when you know that it's time to go, when when the company's values are not aligning with yours.
Yes. And I think that that's a huge one. And, just to add to your advice about sticking to your values, I would also say, like, know your values. Know
Mm,
your values and know your worth, right?
mm-hmm.
Because then once you know them and you understand them, then you will know what you will accept and
Yep.
what you will tolerate and what you won't tolerate. Like, you'll know. So, like,
Mm-hmm.
when those things show up for you, you go, now, fool me once, shame on me, right? Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Big shame,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Mm-hmm.
Fool me a third time, okay,
Mm.
now then I deserve to be shamed. I
That is
definitely do.
true.
Yeah. So I think that's a really big one when it comes to our values, like
Mm-hmm.
knowing understand and know who you are. And also
Yeah.
understand that you're not going to know that today. As you build and develop your career as an HR professional, you build your values and
Mm-hmm.
you'll know like what organizations work best for you, what organizations don't work best for you. And
Mm-hmm.
that sometimes takes time.
Yep, it does.
Hmm. I see Cleva
Mm-hmm.
adding a comment here saying, agreed, recognizing when an environment is not a good fit or no longer a good fit. When it is not a good fit or no longer a good fit. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
is very important. Very good. So that takes us into our next question, which
Mm-hmm.
is, what are some of the recommendations, Ms. Wendy, that you have for anyone listening on how to deal with a toxic environment? What are some of your recommendations? How do we deal with toxic environments, especially if we're not in a position to know, um, to go? If we're not in a position to put ourselves in to say, okay, I'm going to go, I'm going to leave, well, how do we deal with that?
So if you're not in a position to leave immediately, I would say start your exit strategy and determine what that will look like. My next advice would be find that network that we spoke about earlier, of a group of people that you can trust and have those conversations with, those private conversations with, and bounce ideas off of. Lastly, take some days for yourself. Too often, we are in the office trying to make sure we meet every deadline and we're available, but disconnect. Just don't take the day off, mental health day, but actually disconnect from the workplace and do something fun. Whether I'm in Florida, so go to the beach, um, hit a pool, have a nice dinner, but do something for yourself. And what I found too that I've been doing lately is back to rather is journaling. Journaling has really helped me a lot. So I would just say those are the three things. Begin thinking about what your exit is going to look like. And also, one last thing that was shared with me, write your termination letter, and go ahead and then just write it out, put a
Yeah,
date to it, and that will be your end date. I had to push mine back a couple of times, but go ahead and write your termination letter.
yes, yes. That sounds like great advice. That's advice that I give to my clients as well. A lot of times I'll be like, okay, if you know that you're ready to go, then just write that letter, put a date to it, be realistic about that exit date, but write
Mhm.
that letter, stick it in a file, and when you're ready for it, you just print it off, sign it, hand it in, and be done with that. And there's great release that comes from writing that letter, right?
Yes. Yes. It
How did
is.
you how did you feel when you wrote yours?
When I wrote it, I was like, well, why aren't you giving it today? Right. 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 But again, it goes back to thinking about your team and that exit strategy for my team as well, and what that would look like. And so that was what kind of held up my decision to move forward. And of course, I'm a dedicated employee. I wanted to make sure that there was some things that was tied up, that any loose ends that I had was also taken care of. My team shouldn't have to suffer because the workplace is that bad, but
Yeah.
unfortunately, you know, it happens
But
sometimes.
that's a really great point, though, Wendy, that,
Mhm.
as you create that exit strategy as an HR professional, taking your team into consideration and making sure that they are also prepared for that. Like,
Mhm.
what were some of the things that you did personally? Let's first tackle your exit strategy. What did your exit strategy look like? Just to give people an idea of how you can put an exit strategy together, because a lot of times we talk about creating an exit strategy, but we don't talk about what that means or what that's made up of. So what for you, what was that?
So for me, it was a deadline. When that end date would come. The next thing was I did share with my team what my plans were, and I also asked, hey, what is it that you need before I'm gone? And so the third thing was ensuring that there was a system in place that would be able to assist the team. And I started kind of just making mental notes and notes of how to's, instructional database on how to do pretty much everything that I did. I am a big believer of coaching and mentoring. So my team always sat in meetings, always were abreast of what was happening. So from the beginning, they knew, what to do if I was to, go on vacation or got ill or whatever it was. So I was thankful for that, to be able to have already had that in place. And then just some Q&A questions that could potentially come up in my absence. I did create some of those things. And so just any outstanding projects, I sped up the deadline to try to get those projects resolved prior to my end date.
Wow, you thought of everything, huh? Was
I
that
hope
just to
I
was that
hope it
just
was
to make
enough.
sure that they didn't call you like you know
No, I will always be available for anyone who has any questions. And any organization that I've worked at and I'm no longer at, I continue to have friends from that organization, because you got to figure, you spend most of your time there. You get to know their kids, their
yeah,
families, so you just can't cut that off.
yeah. And I think this speaks huge to the context surrounding reputation, right? As an HR professional or as a professional in any fields for that matter. Like
Mhm.
when you've made that decision that you are going to make an exit, that you make sure that you think about the people that you're leaving behind, and also think about all the things that you could cover. Because I think when you're leaving, when you leave and it's coming from a space of, okay, this no longer works for me, but I know that other people still are here and I want to make sure that they are covered, that there's a great, what's the word I'm looking for, Wendy? There's a great feeling that comes from that, to know that you are respected as a professional, right? I think that
Mhm.
enhances trust and respect, because I think, like, so imagine like you left and you didn't do any of that and people were left all helter skelter, struggling to find stuff. But then at some point in time you ended up in a space where you were looking to recruit someone and you felt like you worked well with those people and you wanted to reach out to them to see if they'd come work with you again, the
Mhm.
chances of them saying yes would be very unlikely, because you left us high and dry and with what versus what you did. And I'm sure that if at some point in time you needed those people, as your consultancy grows and expands and you need people, that you'll be able to call on those people and they would willingly come. So I think that that speaks volumes to the importance of how we leave things.
And not only that, I felt like I had a really great relationship with my team. And it would
Mm-hmm.
not be fair to them if I just kind of up and high and dry and left. And so I always manage on transparency. So that was my biggest thing. If it was something that I could share, and of course, there's things that sometimes you can't, but I was as transparent as possible with my team throughout my tenure at any organization. So for me, to just leave and not be transparent, that would say something about how much I actually trusted them, right? And so for me, just to be honest, and people want that. That's another thing about toxic workplaces. Just be honest with your staff. If there's no honesty there and they have to hear it from here, that's the worst thing, right? Because
Yes.
first of all, they've heard it from someone else. It may not be true. And now you're on playing damage control. So just be honest.
Yeah, I think to the point that was made very early in the show, I think it was from Talia. The trust issues also contribute to toxicity in the workplace. So
Mhm.
yeah, to your point, like being open and being transparent from the outset really does help when you are making that transition. I think
Mhm.
Cleva also is in agreement with you. I'll just bring up her comment. She says, I agree with Wendy and the need for keeping the team updated, supported, coaching and mentoring. This is key. I think that even though you may experience toxic behavior in your work environment, you can maintain your professionalism and through your coaching or the team encourage them to operate differently.
Mhm. Agree.
So yeah.
Yeah. It's a good
Any
statement.
thoughts on like how do you how do you deal with the fact that yes, you have found your way out, but how do you deal with the feelings that come from the people you're leaving behind who are awesome people, but now you're leaving them to deal with the stuff that you were probably protecting them from.
Oh, it was tough. As I believe it was Cleva mentioned, you just provide that support and let them know that you are available. It's okay to check in, right? Hey, how are you doing? Just doing a pulse check. If you need to chat, I'm here. And if they have any questions, be supportive. You want your staff to be just as successful as if you were still there. So you would still provide the same level of support as if you were there, even though you're not. And I think
Mhm.
that's how it is. And if they call and say, "Hey, I'm looking for a job. I have an opening," and come on, I don't mind you joining me, right? But
Uh-huh.
seriously though, just providing that support, same level of support,
Yeah.
no matter where they're at, whether they're there or if they go to another location.
Definitely. I think that's a great way to be and a great ethos to have in terms of how you deal with supporting those people when you leave them behind, because that's a hard one. I've struggled with that on like a few times in my career, like leaving a toxic environment, but knowing that I've left behind really good people. But as you said, if you prepare them and you have those conversations and you're mentoring them through that whole period that you're still there, leaving them with all of the necessary things that they would need to deal with the role when you're gone, it makes life a lot easier. But those check ins help a lot. Those check ins help a lot. So that's really great advice. Yeah. I think we covered the last two questions. So what I'm gonna say is, which was like, what are the strategies? And I think you talked about in terms of like journaling, going to the beach, like self care. Your self care matters. Healing from a toxic workplace. How do you? What are some of the things that you do in order to take better care of yourself and kind of process your start that healing process, sorry, for putting this behind me and not taking this into my new environment?
Typically what happens is fear kicks in when there's a layoff or you leave an organization without a plan. And so this, what I did was I decided to take a mental health break. I did not jump back into the workforce. I did not do any consulting. I took some time off, a couple of months. I just read a lot of books, um, reflected on journaling, like what my values were, what I was going to be looking for in the next organization that I went to. I what else did I do? I just I just relaxed. And I
Yeah.
think I needed that. I just needed to just relax. I got off social media. I wasn't on as much. And I just took that time and just caught up on things around the house. I didn't even realize how busy I could be during that time, but
Yeah.
it was just relaxing. And I started back exercising. One thing I noticed is that when you're not engaged in some type of physical activity, whether it's walking or just getting on the elliptical, whatever, exercising does something for you. It sets the day. And so I
Yeah.
get up. I was getting up in the morning. I was walking and just took a couple of weeks, months off to just focus on me, what I was looking for, what my values were, and to be very strategic on the next at the for the next organization that I wanted to be at. Location, do I want to work remote or do I want to go back in the office? Salary, this is what I'm willing to work at. I'm not going to take something less or not, whatever. Healthcare, flexibility. Just jot down those things during that period and don't rush. I always say, what is the worst that can happen? And fear holds us back. And
Mm-hmm.
so when I was considering leaving my employer, it was always, well, if I don't have a job, I can't do X. So finally, I just said, well, what's the worst that can happen? Well, the worst that can happen, I can rent my house and go stay with my mom. you know, like that is the worst thing
Yeah.
that can happen. So if you're considering leaving an employer, just really, really sit down and think about what are the worst things that can happen. And when you do, take some time for yourself. Take some time to debrief the same way
Yeah.
you debrief from meetings or trainings or whatever it is that you engage in. Debrief from the organization that you just left.
Mm-hmm.
That would be my only tip.
Yeah. I think that that's great advice, like, especially in terms of your last point about debriefing, because and taking respect that pause. Be
Hmm.
okay with that pause in your career, in your moment, however long that takes. Because the
Hmm.
worst thing you could do is go from one organization to the next with all of that baggage that you then push out to the other your new organization, or that kind of sets you up from creating barriers to having successful relationships within your new organization. So if you need to
What?
take that time, take it.
Yep.
Yeah.
And what I was gonna say was too, when you allow fear to settle in and you're leaving and you don't take that break, you miss those red flags again. And it
Mm-hmm.
becomes a revolving door. You're like, well, how did I get back in this situation? It's because
Yes.
you haven't taken that pause and you haven't really done your due diligence to focus on what it is exactly that you want and you're looking for and that you
Yeah.
need.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times, and this is to Lynette's point, which I love. Lynette makes the point that it's, as we talk about this taking a break, working in a toxic environment is like
Mhm.
being in a toxic
Yes.
relationship. So just like you don't rush into another relationship with someone after an abusive relationship, it helps not to rush into another job, but to take the time to heal. Yes,
Mhm.
yes, yes.
Mhm.
I say that all the
Yep.
time to clients, because you will, for whatever reason, it is going to impact your new employer. You're going to
Mhm.
put up barriers, things that seem familiar, instead of you giving it a chance, you're going to immediately react to it. So you need to give yourself the moment to heal, the moment to digest what's happened to
Mhm.
you, and then process it and move on. And I want to add this last point before we move on to our wrapping up of this conversation, because I can't believe 50 minutes have gone already. I think a lot of times we don't take the time not just to heal, but to forgive ourselves.
Mm.
Especially as HR professionals, I think we get caught up in this when we work in a toxic environment and it isn't working out, and we have to take our leave, and we feel defeated because we weren't able to do anything about it. We leave with such guilt and burden.
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing that we need to be able to do in order to move past that and to be successful at anything else that we do is to go in the mirror and look at ourselves and say, I forgive you. I
Mm.
forgive you. It's the hardest thing to do, but it's the best thing you could ever do for yourself. And to Lynette's point about toxic relationships, I think that that's important as well, because sometimes whether it's a toxic personal relationship or a toxic
Mm-hmm.
work relationship, because you may have had a toxic relationship with your CEO or your CFO or anyone else in the
Mm-hmm.
organization who impacted your success, that you forgive yourself for that as well. And forgiveness is the
Mm-hmm.
beginning of healing. So
Absolutely.
be in a space where you can forgive yourself. Take that moment to forgive yourself. Sit in those feelings because they will come back. Like
Mm-hmm.
you'll have like those moments, those flashback moments in your mind. I call them Ali McBeal moments. You'll have those flashback moments in your mind, right? I'm dating myself when I talk about Ali McBeal, but you have those flashback moments in your mind where you're like, you wish, you see the situation and you go, damn,
Mm-hmm.
I wish I'd done something better about that, you know?
You do. Don't beat yourself up, right? Again, we're human. We are entitled to make mistakes, but learn from them and move
Yeah.
forward. And like you said, forgive yourself and know that you are great. I mean, you've made it this far. Let me tell you, anybody that survives a toxic work environment, they are tough like Teflon. So so
Mhm.
you are great, you're amazing, because it's a struggle, and
It is.
unfortunately there's a lot of toxic work environments out there, so
Oh,
hey,
yes. We always hear people talk about these great, this great work environment, like my organization is great, this is great, that is great. But you know what? And I say, you know what? Good for you. But the majority of us are not experiencing that. We just are not,
they're
you
not.
know.
Mm-mm.
And so I think that it's really important that you, as you said before, find your community. Recognize that when you go through this and you come out on the other side, you are going to have an experience that you're going to be able to share. So, what now becomes your story is now someone else is able to take from that. Just like you were able to share your story today, this is now something that our audience is going to be able to hold on to and go, wow, like I really am so glad that I was able to be part of this conversation. I learned so much from you for sharing your story. And it takes a lot of courage. That's what Magnifying HR Voices is all about. We're having courageous conversations about things that are happening in HR that we're just not talking about. We don't talk about enough, or we don't ever talk about, and they
Mm-hmm.
should be talked about.
Yeah,
So, yes, you're welcome, Lynette. Lynette was like, thanks for that prescription.
I saw it.
She said,
Definitely.
yes, agreed. Those moments really flash back. Thanks for the recommendations. Forgiveness of self, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Forgiveness of self, respect the power of the pause. Wendy, what are your final comments to this beautiful audience who are sharing in this conversation today?
My final comment is just basically put yourself first. And know that you are definitely not in this alone, but you have got to put yourself first. And I cannot stress that more than anything. Your health, your physical, mental, emotional well-being is key. You cannot be supportive of others if you're not in a good space. And so that's really my final thoughts. Let me just add to this last caveat. If you're
Sure.
contemplating that you should be leaving, you're going back and forth, that's a sign that you should be leaving and start looking at your exit strategy for sure.
Yes.
Mhm.
Wendy, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with
No,
me
not a
today
problem. Not
to
a
have
problem.
this very pertinent conversation. I am so glad to call you friend, ally, colleague, and just to be able to see this side of you beyond toxicity. I love this, Wendy.
Thank you. Thank you. That might be a segue to my book. But I
Listen,
wanted to share with everybody I got your book. And I am looking forward to reading it. And
oh my
so,
goodness.
and I just appreciate you having me on this platform. It's amazing of what everything that you're doing, and I thank everyone for joining in as well today.
Absolutely. I hope you enjoy reading when you get back to reading.
I
Um,
will.
and yeah, like guys, if you do not have your copy of Confessions of an HR Pro, Stories of Defeat and Triumph, it is available on Amazon. Go check it
Mhm.
out. Um, I'm based in the Caribbean, so it's the only place I can put it right now. But I am next year. There'll be other options, hopefully. So because I know a lot of my indie readers have been saying, "Oh, is it available in indie bookstores?" Not right now, but we'll make
Mm.
that happen. We'll make that happen for
Mm.
sure. So we are at the end of this week's episode, but coming up next week, we're going to be again talking about how do we support HR, especially this time when it comes to recruitment. And joining me for that conversation is another one of my amazing friends, Laura Mazzullo, and she's going to be sharing her experiences. Laura specifically recruits for HR professionals, and so she'll be sharing some tips and tricks on how you can have and find the best job for you and how you can actually get support and engage in her services. Laura is also a huge advocate for HR support. And she does provide a lot of that. And so we will be having some of that conversation as well. So I look forward to seeing you guys here, same time, same channel. I'm also now, for the first time ever, thanks, Wendy, broadcasting to YouTube. So if you can't catch us
Yay.
on LinkedIn, you can also now catch it on my podcast channel on YouTube, which is HR Sound Off. Some great things coming up for 2022, which I will be announcing very soon. But with all that being said, we are at the end of our show. Thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you again next week.
Thanks, everybody.